was I throwing away my future by doing this, by helping more than I probably should? I felt like it was a superpower to be able to see them and look away. And I feel like most people could do that, but I couldn't. I couldn't see them and look away. I could literally feel death in that room when that boy took his last breaths. Part of me also walking away with a conviction from that room was also the feeling of like, I've stared death in its face. This is the worst it can be. So what's the worst that can possibly happen? Right? And I feel like I can put up a fight. I don't care whether you think it's cool or not.
So many things died in that room that day.
Yes.
We've already started. Welcome to Atypical Podcast. Now, I think I said it like atypical podcast, but it is Atypical Podcast. One word. And thank you all for tuning in and for watching or listening. And with me today, I have James Okina. And I've known James for a while now. I think, how many years?
5, maybe. Yeah, 5.
5 years.
Yeah.
And it feels like 10.
Yeah.
It feels like 10. But yeah. James is the founder of, do you say co-founder or founder?
Founder.
Yeah. Okay. Founder of Street Priests, which you started at the age of
15.
So we're going to be talking about a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And let's see how this conversation goes.
Yeah.
All right. So let's start off with like how we met. Like, how did I meet you?
I think I just woke up one day and I got a notification from Facebook.
So did I slide into DMs?
No. I saw a post on Facebook, and I knew of you, but I'd never met you. We've never talked.
What did you know of me?
I think the first time I saw you, you were on a talk show. This was maybe 2016 or 2017. Mm-hmm. You were in a talk show. And you were talking about at IPPC.
That's a crisis medicine program.
Yeah. You were talking about King's Chat. It was a talk show. And I just like...
No, I think it was GYLF I was talking about.
Yeah, probably GYLF.
Yes,
GYLF. And I think that's how I just knew of you, right?
And GYLF is the Global Youth Leaders Forum that... Yes. Is a product of Love World, right? Yeah. Interesting. So you see this, you wake up in the morning and you see this post. And what does the post say? I
think I have to read it because it was quite. So yeah, I saw the Facebook post. It said it's dated February 20th, 2018. It said Deji Olubisi is with James Okina, and that's like how you tag someone on Facebook. It said, shout out to James Okina, one of the most inspiring teenagers I know today. Your coverage on Project Africa brought tears to my eyes. The testimony of Kingsley, whom you picked up from the streets and educated and housed through high school, was just so touching, as well as the story of the young man that ended up dying at the hospital in spite of your efforts. Just thought I'd let you know how inspiring you are. Your labor of love is not in vain. Love you dearly. And we had a picture of me, which was interesting because I didn't even know how you would get that photo.
Picture.
But it was really heartwarming. And I guess we can talk about this later. But working on Street Priest at age 15, 16, 17 was a very, very isolating endeavor. Isolating socially because I wasn't doing the things that teenagers were doing, right? It's like while maybe a teenager is worried about wearing the nicest clothes.
Because 15 is pretty young.
Yeah. And
that was also jarring for me in that episode of Project Africa that I saw, right? Like the image is still in my head, the image of you carrying that young boy. I think at that point, it hadn't been declared dead yet. I don't think so.
No.
But the image of you carrying him to the hospital at that time and like seeing a kid caring for another kid, that was huge. Like, and for me, like I said, like that image has not left my mind. Like it just did something to me. Like a child. I mean, in a world where you expect adults to do that, and at the time when that young man died, how old were you?
I probably was
Maybe
16.
16 at that time. So imagine like in a world where, like that stuff that, people in their 30s, in fact, some would even say that society should be responsible for that young man. And there you were. And unfortunately, he passed. Talk about that story.
I think it was, and to the point about, that endeavor being very isolating. It was not just socially, it was mentally as well, because I didn't have a lot of examples of what life looks like 10 years down the line if I did this. So
where's the continuity? Right?
Where's the continuity? And I also had dreams. Like, so there was a strong sense of, was I throwing away my future by doing this, by helping more than I probably should? Granted, there was no frame of reference for me at the time to know what is too much, I just felt a sense of urgency. And for a long time, I described it like being cursed, because I felt like it was a superpower to be able to see them and look away. And I feel like most people could do that, but I couldn't. I couldn't see them and look away.
Wow.
And so when I met Nduke, that was his name, and I like to mention his name every time I get the chance to, because someone said, the first time someone dies is when they leave this world. The final time they die is the last time someone mentions their name, and I believe that.
Come on, I think that's kind of the running theme in what's that animation called? Coco.
Yeah,
I think that's
the
running theme as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and so when I met him, his friends told me he had been lying. They first said he was asleep, and I didn't know so much about what was going on, but I think I first got alarmed when I felt his temperature and he was cold. I'd never felt a human being that cold in my life.
Wow.
And he was still breathing, but I could tell something was wrong. So I tried to, wake him up, because they said he was asleep, but he wasn't waking up.
Pause. Like, how did that? What led up to that point? Like, how did you even get
there?
Yeah.
So I think it was June 16th, 2016. Mm-hmm. That's the exact precise date. I believe the day of the African child is June 16th. And so we had an event to commemorate the Day of the African Child. Basically, it was going to be a movie viewing for children on the streets.
Wow.
So we had prepared, the food, we had prepared the venue, everything was set. I had gone out to go get some of them from this area in Calabar, Nigeria, called Bogobri. So that's where they stayed, and I was going to get some of them. So when I went, a lot of them were excited to see me. They came out, we were ready to go, and I was like, what's wrong with Nduke? They said he's asleep. So,
did you know him prior to that time?
Yes, I have pictures of him when he was alive and well and everything. So I went there, I felt his temperature and he was cold. I just knew something was wrong. And so I tried to wake him up. He wasn't responsive, but he was still breathing. Perhaps I think one very sharp contrast I remember about that moment is how peaceful he was breathing, despite the backdrop of the real weight of that moment. And I've never had to deal with someone dying before. I've never been in that situation, but I just knew I had to do something, right? I went there with someone else. I immediately told him to take the rest of the children to the venue, and then I was going to try to get Nduke to the hospital. When I lifted him up, a crowd began to gather. That's when adults, people, it was like a mob was building. Everybody started asking, why are you taking him to? Why are you taking him to? Why are you taking him to? Who are you? I'm like, I don't know. He's sick. He looks like he's dying. He needs help. And I think it's funny that he was lying there for 2 days. No one responded until I lifted him up and people were saying, where are you taking him to? Where are you taking him to?
Wait, he was there for 2 days?
Yep. It was at the spot where I found him for 2 days.
Was this in a house?
This was by the roadside. There's literally the main road. There's a drainage system. We call them gutters. And then on the other side where you kind of have like the grass growing, that's where he was lying. And
his friends thought he was sleeping?
His friends thought he was sleeping. I think pretty ignorant for them to say that, but at the same time, they're also desensitized to things like this. Because the cause of Nduke's death was actually a tramadol overdose. So sometimes when they take tramadol and other substances, they sleep for prolonged period of times. Yes. So when I took him, eventually someone broke through the crowd and asked what happened, and then I told him, and then he was like, do you have money? Do you have money to pay for the hospital bill? And I said no. And then he put some amount of cash in my hand, and that's kind of how everybody just kind of dissipated. I called a taxi. I put in.
Do you know who this person is?
I don't know who this person is. I can't recognize them if I ever see them. And so I got into the cab and I went to the hospital. When I went there,
do you ever stop to think that maybe that was an angel?
I think so. I mean, there are many moments in my life where I would sit back and think, was that even a real person? Because I don't think.
Because I think what that person did there was even more than just giving you the cash.
Yeah.
You were now facing like
people. I didn't
some
know.
kind of like mob judgment. And this person comes in, they hand you the cash, and somehow crowd also dissipates at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I got to the hospital, I remember running in because he was still lying down there, like in the cab. So I just told the man to wait. And then I ran in, I said,
sorry, I keep taking you back. Sorry. This ride to the hospital, like with him, like there, like what was that like? Was your heart beating? What was on your mind, like on that journey?
I think it was definitely a blur. I don't remember, what I was thinking, but one thought that occupied my mind was, like, I hope this boy leaves. I hope this boy leaves. I hope this boy leaves. And when we got to the hospital, I ran out into the reception and I said, is there someone here? Can someone help? There's a child a nurse comes out with me and she takes one look at him and knows he's a street child, says, where did you get this boy from? And I say, like, I found him lying on the streets. He needs help. They say, okay, you need to buy a hospital card. And at this point, I'm almost losing my mind because, like, what do you mean we need to buy a hospital card? He's not okay. Can you?
And you probably could have told, like, from her disposition that to her, it's like, what did the cat dragon like?
Yeah.
What is this?
Her demeanor just changed as soon as she could recognize that he was a street kid. There's a derogatory term they refer to in Calabar. They call them scolombo, and it's a very bad word. So I think she must have even used it to refer to him. I believe while I was going back and forth with her, a doctor, she comes and she, puts her fingers, I think, on his neck and on his hand to try to feel his pulse. And she screamed, she's like, bring him in. She said, he has no pulse. At this point, his heart was still beating, but his pulse was so weak, she couldn't feel it. She couldn't even, and that was the first time, the nurse kind of cooperated. That was the picture of me now lifting him into the hospital. We didn't even have time to get him onto a hospital bed. He was placed on a table when the doctor tried to insert drips, and then she was trying to, I guess, inject things on to get his heart going. I don't think they had I think it's called a defibrillator.
I can never say that one right. I can never say
that thing. That word. I don't think they had it, but she was trying to use other things to try to get his heart going. And I remember the exact moment. This whole time he's breathing very peacefully. His eyelids are half open. And I remember the time when he felt like something was happening. This was the first time he was struggling to breathe. It was like he was taking half breaths and then full breaths and then half breaths and then full breaths. And then he just didn't breathe again. And the room just fell silent. I think for me, I've never seen somebody
Die like in front, like not just even like die around you, like right there,
right in front of
like
me.
The moment where the spirit leaves their body.
I didn't believe it because I mean, if you look at a body moments before they die and moments after, it's the exact same. I didn't believe it. And I still sat there and the doctor said, like, it's done, it's over. And she walked out. I just sat there for a while, and because we laid him on the table, I'll not forget. His hands were out on the table by his sides like this. And I think after I'd stayed there for an hour or two, I wanted to move his hand back and his hand was stiff. It wasn't really moving. And that's when it kind of began to dawn on me, what had happened. And my hands kept trembling. I missed the event. So I went back, they'd finished. I couldn't even speak to anybody. I went home. My hand was still shaking. I remember my mom, she looked at me. She took one look at me and she was like, is everything all right? At first I said yes. And then she went about what she was doing, and then she offered me dinner.
She didn't know. She didn't know what happened.
She didn't know what happened. And I remember when she offered me dinner and I refused to eat, and that never happens.
And I feel like there's a bit of like inside joke here happening at the same time, because like
I never refuse food. That's the catch. That's when she sat down. She held my hand. My hand was still shaking while she held it, and she asked me what happened. And she was the first person I recounted everything to. And I'll never forget. For context, my mom never supported my work with children on the streets. There was a time I didn't speak to her for a while because of it. And her rationale was simple. Like, you're working with kids who are addicted to substances, Indian hemp, all these things. In her eyes, I'm still a child. And granted, she was right.
Yes.
I'm 15 years old. These kids are 13. They're 14. Who's to say that they will not influence you to do the same? I found it insulting.
You know how grown you think you are when you're 15?
Exactly.
Every now and again, I flash back and I think about how like nobody could tell me anything.
Exactly.
Like I know, like how who are you to tell me I'm a child? Like I know what my life is about.
And I found it very insulting and disappointing. Like, why would you even think that? Why would you even say that? And so she didn't really support my work with, children on the streets, which was also the hesitance of me, telling her what had happened at first. But after I finished, she asked me, what can I do? How can I?
Wow.
That was the next word that came out of her mouth, or the next words that came out of her mouth. And I think that moment did a lot for me. It did a lot for me. There were times where I was ashamed of my work with children on the streets. And I think it's, it was a kind of shame that was always present. But the only difference was that my conviction always outweighed that shame. And so the way I dealt with it was, I said I was going to do this only for a few years and then I'll move on to other things. Again, there's no frame of reference. I don't know someone who's done this kind of work. I don't know how their life has turned out. I had nothing to use to measure my experience against, or what a future going down this path will look like.
Yeah.
And I'm surrounded by...
There's no North Star, as it were, right?
Nothing.
It's like...
And I'm surrounded by adults who are constantly reminding me about how futile such an endeavor is. Like, you can't solve this problem. Like, if the government hasn't solved this problem, who do you think you are? Like, in not so many words. And some people would literally tell it to your face. They'll tell it to your face. So that moment right there, like, it did everything for me. It was definitely one of, speaking about predestination, I think it's one of the turning points in my life, like a crucial turning point, because I remember just leaving, and my hand kept trembling for like the next maybe 24 to 36 hours. I had no control over the tremor on my hand. And I remember just sitting down there and thinking, like, no matter what happens, I'm not going to like I'm not going to give up. I don't want to ever see this happen again. And I think definitely
so many things are going through my mind. First of all, like I'm thinking, first of all, like Street Priest has been how many years old now?
November this year will make Street Priest 9 years old.
9 years old, right? So you've been doing it for that long.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, like, first thought in my mind is that's an experience that would send the average kid to therapy for years. I mean, and no shade at all, but like, we're in America where therapy, mental health, all of that stuff's a big deal, right? And there's a lot to explore in like how instead of that thing that even caused like physical tremor, to produce long-term need for psychiatric or psychiatric monitoring, instead caused it to blossom, as it were, right? To come into your purpose. And I think another thing that I love about that inflection point too is you talked earlier about the isolation of, I think I would even term it like the burden of isolation that came with the call or the purpose. And that inflection point with your mom saying what she said sort of tipped the scale, and then all of a sudden from being alone or mentally alone, now you feel like, okay, not only can I do this, I can get other people, maybe subconsciously you also thought I can get other people to care.
It was that, and even I don't care if other people care. Like it was that and that. And I think coming back to the Facebook post that you made, moments like that, I treasure them a lot more. Like when someone saw me and my work for what it was, like it really meant a lot to me. Like I felt seen.
I see.
Like I felt seen. I felt like it mattered, right? Because Nduke died, and the next day I went right back to work. But even more jarring to me was like the world just continued. Like everybody went about their business, the world went on, and nobody
probably cared that he even left.
Nobody cared, and there was a little bit of this. I don't want to say, for lack of a better word, there was a little bit of this darkness I carried inside me, like because it's an experience I hope never to experience in my life. But I could literally feel death in that room when that boy took his last breaths. And I think part of me also walking away with a conviction from that room was also the feeling of like, I've stared death in its face. Like, this is the worst it can be. So what's the worst that can possibly happen? Right? And I feel like I can put up a fight. I feel like I wasn't ready when Nduke happened, but I feel like I can put up a fight now. And I don't care. Like I don't care about the things. And part of the shame that came with my work was I was still a teenager at the end of the day. I still cared about what people's perception of me was. But in that moment, he died. I didn't care anymore. Like I don't care whether you think it's cool or not.
So many things died in that room that day.
Yes. It was such a pivotal point for me. And when I look back, I think it was a very special experience. And bringing it back to the conversation around mental health and trauma, I wrote a note in my journal a few days ago. I don't think I'm someone who's designed to carry personal ambition. I think I will crumble under the weight of personal ambition. But when it's time to shoulder the burden of a community, my stamina is limitless. And I think it comes back to how we're designed. I think it's the reason why some people will find themselves in certain situations and it will break them.
That's interesting, because as you say that, I'm imagining someone that was designed to shoulder the weight of, how did you put it? The weight of like
a community burden.
A community burden. And they're on Wall Street.
Yeah. It's going to eat them alive. It's going to eat them alive.
And then the need for, oh man, this is deep. So the need that person has in that space for all of the psychological assistance, be it like even physical medication and otherwise, is not because the work in itself is because yes, they may feel like the work is burdensome, but such a person can be moved into a different environment in terms of a different line of work that suits what they were crafted for.
That's correct.
And work just the same, if not more.
Yep.
And have no problems.
That's correct. I think
have different problems.
Yeah, it's. I think it's really fundamentally how we're designed, right? Like, I mean, and I think there's, biological evidence to this. There's a reason why no two people have the same fingerprints.
Yeah,
like we're designed differently fundamentally, and I think having the opportunity to find what you're designed for, and to function how you're designed, will eliminate a lot of struggles and frustrations. In life, like the frictions, sometimes are just unnecessary. And these experiences helped me find that, like, sometimes I listen to people, right, who are very good at what they do. I was watching a highlight of the British Formula One driver Lewis Hamilton. He was describing a particular race. He said it was one of the best races of his career. I think it was in Singapore, and he said it was less than ideal conditions, but he felt like he was one with his car. And he said he described it as stardust. He said it was just, and I could.
A lot of people talk about that though.
Yeah, but I feel like people talk about in different careers, right? And I feel like when I'm working on something that affects young people, children, like that's my moment. I don't stutter. Like I don't have to think. Like for me, that's stardust. Like I'm operating where I was born to
and everything is just in sync.
Everything is in sync, and you can't touch me. You can't stop me. Like that's my arena.
I love it.
That's just how it has worked.
So that's a perfect segue into, let's talk about like how Street Priest started. Like, because all of this we've already even gone like ahead at this point. Yeah. So let's step back to how this started, because what you're describing is what a lot of people yearn for. And who knows, maybe they've had the similar experiences that led you into this calling, as it were, but they didn't recognize it for what it was. That moment, that stardust moment, as it were. Like maybe they've experienced things like that hinted at this may be the direction, but they didn't know what it was. Talk about how Street Priest began.
Street Priest, I think it's one of those moments in life where I've struggled to take credit for the starting of Street Priests. And the reason why I struggle to take credit for that is because I feel like in a sense it found me. And I've discussed this with my team. I feel like it's one of those things that if I didn't do, someone else would have done. Like I feel like it came to me fully formed. That's how I feel about Street Priest.
Sorry to cut you off. It's actually interesting that you said that, because I've heard a number of like very impactful people say the same thing. What's her name? And this is from the for those that know her, Catherine Coleman.
Yeah,
I've heard that she said that I don't know if it's that she strongly believes or that the Lord told her, I'm not exactly sure, but that somebody else was supposed to do what she was doing. Like I don't know if it's a feeling that she had that somebody else was supposed to do what she was doing, but the person, for whatever reason, didn't take up the responsibility. And I've also heard people say it as well. One of my bosses used to say that ideas are in the air. Ideas are in the air, that somebody somewhere is going to catch it. If it's coming to your mind, if something is coming to your mind, believe that it's coming to somebody else's mind, or it's already been living in another person's mind. The person that births it is the one that wins the rights as a guest.
Yeah.
As it were, rather. But go ahead. So you talked about how it was fully formed. And
Yes, I believe there's a lot of context around how Street Priest came to be. I think a more simplified version of the story will definitely be when I met Frederick. This was the first child on the streets that I met. He was 12, 13 at the time. I say child on the streets, but when I met him, I was 14, 15. But when I met Frederick was so talented. One of the most talented people I've ever met in my life. He was an acrobat. Name it, he could do it. Flip 15 times before he lands, he can do it. He could play the guitar.
Wow.
He could dance. And he was very intelligent.
Just as you're saying it, I wonder if that's like if God was kind of like trying to give you like an archetype of like just like put like all the like the things that they could be,
yep,
and wrap them all in one for you to see, like to like actually, because people have talents, but how many of them actually like manifest that in a way that you're able to appreciate them even at that young age?
Yep. And he was also very mature and fully formed for his age.
Wow.
So I actually spoke to him because I'd seen him flipping, and he did this incredible like somersault into cartwheel into backflips, and then and then lands, and then I was enamored, and I began to speak with him, and as I learned more about him, he said he lives by himself. I was like, what do you mean you live by himself? You live by yourself? Could not grasp the concept, and so I befriended him, and he said he was hungry at the time I met him. I bought dinner for him. We ate dinner together, and every day, I'd also graduated high school pretty early. I graduated high school when I was 14. So I was working at the time that I met him. This was during my gap year between 14 and 15. And so every day after work, I'll come have dinner with him, and then I'll leave him money for breakfast. And then if he has lunch, when I get back, I'll pay for it. So there was a store there. They knew every day I'll come back and I'll pay. One of the things that drew me to Frederick at the time was also my own trajectory with my parents. I grew up in a very sheltered home. I remember when we were kids, even to play, soccer, the real football. My mom wouldn't even let us play like with the neighborhood kids. When we, clamored that wanted to play. It's a house with 3 boys that wanted to play football. Okay, so she bought the football for us, and then we'll play in front of the house. She'll sit in the we call it veranda, the porch, the front porch, and she'll count the number of times you fall. You fall the first time, that's 1. Fall the second time, you have 1 more strike. If you fall again, you're coming back inside. So that was the environment I grew up in. Yeah. And we will play maybe 2 or 3 aside with a cousin, or because we always had people in the house. And that was the most like physical action we would get. Otherwise, my life was very simple. It was go to school, come back, read. I used to read a lot as a kid, which was something that was a blessing and a curse as well, because it meant I had a wild imagination, or a very vivid imagination.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was a source of frustration for me when I started my work with Street Priest, because I couldn't see where this was going. So I would go to school, come back, eat, sleep, repeat. That was our life. And then in 2008, my parents separated, and all hell broke loose. It was a very interesting transition period, because I still remember they're very simple things that are very triggering for me. I mean, used to be very triggering for me. One of them was the question, what do you want to eat? And the simple reason behind that was because when my parents were together, everything was very structured. You show up at the table, there's food there. Nobody ever asked me, what do you want to eat? But after my parents separated and my older brother moved in with my dad, and every day it was the same question. What do you want to eat? What do you want to eat? What do you want to eat? Because my dad was never around. What do you want to eat? Okay, here's money, go and eat it. There was a time where me and my brother, because again, there's no one day your whole life is structured. The next day, you have to find a way to get to school. You have to, wash your school uniform. You have there was nothing that could prepare us. And then you come back, you have to think about what you're going to eat.
Yeah.
And that question is waiting for you when you get back home. What do you want to eat? My older brother Williams, there was a time where every day we had the same food. And the restaurants we used to go to, once we walked in, they didn't ask us what do you want to eat. They just knew it was afang soup. So they just tabled it. And, it was a very interesting period because I didn't know what to make of that. And I turned to, the wrong crowds for a sense of belonging, for a sense of affirmation. I was a kid who I didn't need any of that. And the reason why I didn't need any of that was simply because you had all of it at home, the affirmation, anything that it was at home, you're good. And then all of a sudden there was no sense of anything.
Yeah.
And so I started shoplifting. I started, breaking. I was stealing things I didn't need. I would join these kids to go and steal PlayStation, game consoles. We didn't even have that in the house. I didn't, would skip school, would go break into offices, break into classes. It was a very terrible time. But during that period, it was probably 3 or 4 years.
And this is after the separation?
After the separation. This was between when I was 8 and 11. So I was very young, probably the time when I needed parental guidance the most. Even while I was doing those things, I knew that I wasn't supposed to be doing them. It was just this quiet inkling in my heart.
Yeah.
I felt like I was trapped within myself because I knew that I was better than this, but I didn't know how to get out of it. In fact, more evidence of that was that if we went shoplifting and they were going to catch anybody, it was me. So anytime they caught somebody, it was me. That was actually fixed. Because I was not good at it. I was not good at it. I was terrible at it. But there was also this struggle within myself that I'm not supposed to be doing this.
Yeah.
I'm better than this and I couldn't find a way out. One thing led to another. I met one person. I think the first almost piece that triggered almost a chain reaction was my dad moved from where he used to live to a new neighborhood. I didn't have access to, because there were two groups of people I was hanging around with. There were people in the neighborhood and then the people at school.
Yeah.
I also changed schools, so I didn't have access to the people in the neighborhood. I didn't have access to the people at school.
So you're forced to make certain changes?
I don't think I was forced to. I think there was a time limit. And I think it's a sense of urgency I also understand in my work with street priests in the aftermath. Because there was this window. And I feel like with a lot of young people, I've worked with both as street priest and other things since then. I feel like there's this window.
Always a window.
If a young person is around certain circles, if you put them in another environment, it's only a matter of time before they gravitate into those circles again. So there was this small window before I because we moved into a worse neighborhood than where we were before.
Yeah.
I had my other school, I didn't have friends who have ever seen a gun. In the new school I moved into, I knew people who had a gun at home.
Wow.
So it was worse. So it was only going to be a matter of time. And that time for me, I think was probably 2 months. Was the summer before I needed to start the new school. And my dad enrolled myself and my brother in some summer lesson. And there was this lady, and I think it always starts with one person like that. Her job was very simple. Teach these kids math. But she saw beyond that. She also knew we didn't have our mother in our lives at the time. And she would make us do math for a short period of time, then quickly segue into the book of Proverbs. Definitely one of the most profound books ever written.
Wow.
And she would make us read Proverbs.
At that age.
And she would read it to us. She would explain it to us. I think it was the first time. It wasn't even what she was doing as much as it was the fact that she was doing it.
That she cared enough.
And she took me seriously, and I began to maybe take myself seriously. And then I had a cousin who moved into our house. He was probably 18 or 19 at the time. Maybe at that time, the most Christ-like person.
Oh, yeah, okay. You need to talk. Let's pause on that, because I've heard you talk about him before, and I think I want you to speak to that again. But quick question: was it in this window period that you also met Frederick?
No.
So this was after the new
after.
school.
I was probably like
started.
11 at this point.
Okay.
So when I started the new school, by the time I started the new school, I had met. First of all, that lady from the summer lesson had set a certain fire. It was the first time, and this is another thing I came to discover about myself. I'm not motivated by the need to just achieve a goal, right? For context, before my parents separated, I was always top 3 in class. After they separated, for the 3-4 years, I was the bottom of the class, and there was no motivation because there was also this thing I knew I was smart. So anything that anybody says to me wasn't going to, push me. Oh, the person who took first, do they have 2 heads? That was another thing they used to say. It never pushed me, because at the back of my mind, which was very interesting, as a kid, I had the awareness. I knew I was smarter than the person who took first. Like, I just had that thing. I felt like I was smarter than them, but I didn't feel the need to. I didn't have the words for it, but there were other things I was grappling with my parents' separation and the need for belonging, the need for affirmation.
But I think there's a point there that I want to emphasize, though. It's very, very easy to ignore kids.
Yeah.
And I was recently at a teens camp, had the opportunity to speak, and I took that thing very seriously in my mind, because people really just like ignore kids.
Yeah.
And I knew the time that window that you talked about, I know exactly what that period was for me.
For you, yeah.
It was the period right when I was about to graduate high school, and maybe just a few months after that. Like, it was just a short period of time. And if it were not for a few people that cared enough, and till today, I don't think maybe at some other point in the course of this podcast, I'll share that story, but I don't think that those guys that came to my school to talk to us, like some college kids that were like alums of my high school, I don't think till this day they know how impactful that one visit was.
Yeah.
Just the fact that they took out one Sunday of their time to come to it was a Christian fellowship that we had in school at the time, and just to speak to us. And that literally set the
chain of events
rolling,
yeah,
that impacted my life so much. Now, at that time I was 15. Most of us were 15, 16, 17, that range, and a lot of people are not mindful of how impactful that period of time is in a young person's life.
Yeah.
That's when, and you're also at the point where everything is so raw and so heightened. Like, there were things that I did wrong at that time, that the sense of guilt was so hyper, that even today I look back and I'm like, why did I feel like you felt everything harder?
Yeah.
Love,
yeah,
you felt, break up, like everything was just like times whatever, just in that age. And it begins to frame, that's what a lot of people reference, like traumas that happen in that same age range into their 40s and their 50s, and they're still
very fundamental and foundational. Yeah. Yeah. And for me, the first thing that happened was when, after that summer class, there's a kind of fire that lady set in my heart. It's all connected. There's a kind of fire she set in my heart.
Yeah.
This whole time, people are telling me, oh, you can do better. I can't tell you the number of times, and this is probably a different conversation for another day. But also at the same time, while we're going through the separation, my father was also going through his own thing with the separation, and he didn't take it well. In fact, he took out a lot of it on me and my brother. There were days where he'll come back and physically descend on us, and we would literally look at each other and we can tell, we feel like today's the day we'll die.
Wow.
And of course, some of these things I know only in retrospect, that a lot of that frustration in his life, he was just, like bringing it and putting, because it was 3 of us in a basically studio apartment. It was 3 of us in a studio apartment. So whenever he looked up to see why his life was terrible, there were 2 physical reminders running around. If he comes back home, different separate conversation, but there was a lot of physical and mental abuse at the time. So there were days where I'll randomly come back from school, ask me, where's your notebook? There's nothing in it. Descend on me. But after that summer lesson, it was the first time someone told me, you can do better, but from the perspective of I believe in you, not condemning me. Wow. And I felt like I had something to prove to this lady. So that was the first fire in my heart when I went to the new school. I gave myself a goal. I wasn't very good at math, but English and all the other, classes I was good at, but I was like, I'm going to be the best at math. And that's exactly what happened. When this cousin, moved into our house, I grew up in a Christian home. We read, the Bible every day. The bishop of the house was my father, but you can't take God seriously when in the morning at 6 a.m. we read about God is love. At 1 a.m. you are being beaten like a criminal. How can you take God seriously? And that's the person who is, preaching God to you. So growing up, even though I grew up in church, God was a concept. I had respect for the concept, but I wanted to put as much distance between me and that concept. In fact, I had a conversation with my brother, and he still remembers this, and we laugh about it. I say, I want to live my life, and then when I'm about to die, I'll ask God to forgive me so I can go to heaven. So that was my relationship with God, period. And then I met this young man who was 18 or 19, and he was so put together. And he was so gracious and so kind and so, I promise you, if he walked on snow, you won't see any footprints. That was how he was in my mind. And this was someone who lived in the house. So, and there was also a graciousness about how he spoke to people, how he regarded people. It was almost like this touch. I could not describe it. I cannot put all the words into it. And I would remember times where I would, see him praying in the room, and I felt so much power in the room, and I didn't have the know how to ask him, but I just felt like I wanted whatever he had. And it was the kind of confidence he had as well. It was a kind of quiet confidence where you look at him, he was confident in himself. He didn't need to talk, he didn't need to prove anything to anybody, and I wanted that. I've always been a person who had I always loved stories. Again, the context is I read a lot growing up. I read a lot of books growing up. And at the time, I'd never left the city where I was born and raised, Calabar, Nigeria. He moved from Lagos to Calabar. So every time I had the opportunity to engage him about what Lagos is like, I've read about Lagos in books, the busy traffic and, all these lanes on the road. No context for what that feels like. So I would engage him in stories. And one of the days I was engaging him like that, he told me about how, because he was a very talented drummer, how he would be paid to drum at certain places and they'll pay him a lot of money. And he probably graduated high school at maybe 16, 17, had a gap year before he came to university at 18. And he said he would take those earnings and he would have outreaches in various places.
That's like Christian
outreaches. And he said he didn't even have, the boldness to talk. So he'll play a message by Pastor Chris and people will gather by the projector and people are watching. And then after the message ends, he will ask people if they want to get to know God and give their hearts to Christ.
That's Pastor Chris, Love Word Inc.
Yes. And when he was saying this story, tears began to roll down my eyes uncontrollably. It was a dark room. He didn't even know I was crying. And I think it was that moment where I felt like he was just describing what life in Lagos was like. But in that moment, I felt like that was it. That's the life I want to live. But it was not articulate like how I'm saying it to you. It was something so visceral that tears just started
and there are
rolling.
no words for it.
And there are no words for it. And at some point he left the room and I just, knelt down by the bed and with tears still rolling down my eyes. This is the first prayer I've ever uttered that I remember what I said. Because I grew up in a religious house. We prayed a lot, but don't know what I said. And I remember saying to God, I said, whatever you can do with a boy like me, do it. That was a turning point. That day, I asked him, after I said that prayer, I told him I want to take my relationship with God seriously. I got a Bible. I said I want to begin to read. I will never forget, I started from Revelation, and he knew a lot of scriptures by heart. So I would open Revelation and I'll mark whatever scripture he tells me. That was how I was reading the Bible, from Revelation, and I was going backwards. At some point he fell asleep. I just kept doing it, and it felt like a couple of minutes. I heard the cock crow. He woke up. It was morning, and I was still there
reading the Bible.
And he said, "My goodness, you're still awake." And that set another kind of fire in my heart. And I think it was in that moment, again, that was another piece in the domino. And over the next 2 years, I felt like I was running away from something and running towards something at the same time. Running away from something in the context of the fact that I'd been known for all these terrible things. Everybody knew me as this kid was. I was a kid who they will use as an example to other kids that don't be like him. So I wanted to put as much distance between myself and that reputation. But at the same time, after I found this course in Tochi and then that lady, I felt like I was running towards something. I wanted to run toward that person that they have modeled for me to be. I joined an after-school academy, iCapture, where I met another very, close mentor, Grace Ihejemaizu. She got married, so her name is Grace Ihejemaizu Polaneti. And she was another person who saw so much in me. And after the after-school academy, she invited me back. I remember I was 14 at this time. She invited me back to take some of the classes, to facilitate some of the classes. And I met another mentor, Joseph Edet Lashakara, because he was a mentor of that after-school academy.
Oh, I know.
Yes, you both of your alma mater. Your alma mater is King's College.
He was actually the school captain a year above me, and even as a student, an exceptional young man in every way, exceptional. Yeah. And
so he ran a business. He ran the biggest fashion brand in the city, and he came regularly to give talks at the after school academy, but he was also a mentor, and he was assigned to be my mentor. I remember the first meeting I had with him after I'd graduated, and I came and told him, I said, I have this business idea. I wanted to be a businessman. I felt like I needed to create job opportunities. That's how I interpreted that at first. And
that meaning that visceral feeling.
That visceral feeling of living a life of purpose. So when I told him about it, he didn't say anything to me. He said, come work with me. Now, we've not had this conversation fully, me and him. But I think I also had that confidence, and that there was a fire in my stomach. I had something to prove. I had something to prove to anybody who still remembered me as, that kid. I also had something to prove to these people who had modeled great behavior for me. And it was with that intensity I was coming to him with this business idea. And I think he knew that it wasn't going to work. I was 15 or 14 at the time, and I had no business experience. And all he said was just come work with me. And I'm also glad that I was able to know enough to accept his proposal of coming to work with him. He gave me business cards the same day. He said, these are your business cards. You have one job. I want you to go around and get as many jobs as we can for the business. Now, that was the work I was also doing when I met Frederick. And this was a connection between me and Frederick. When I saw Frederick, I saw a younger version of myself. I saw myself during those years.
Even though you were what?
Even though I was 14, 15. But I saw the 9, 11-year-old version of myself who was so lost and who I wish someone stopped me and talked to me during those years. I wish someone, who was older,
So even though this was friendship, it was also mentorship, really.
Yes. And I think that thing I couldn't look away because I felt like I was seeing the 9, 11-year-old version of myself, and I couldn't just, that's why I felt like I was also cursed, because you would think, okay, Frederick will, satiate that desire. But then I met Frederick's friend, Kevin, and then I met another kid, and then another kid, and then another kid, and then I found a whole colony of street children. And the first time I met them, I just sat down with them. I was dressed for work, but I just sat down with them near a bin, and we're just talking. And I maybe talked to them for an hour, and then I turned to leave. And I'll never forget one of them, Felix. He grabs my arm, and I turn and I say, what is it? Because I thought he was going to ask for money or for food. And he says, "Uncle, please come back." That's what he said. And for me, that was how Street Priest as an organization only started, because the more I had to help, the more I needed to be organized to be able to get the kind of support I needed. So
at some point, I think you were using your money to pay for food for these kids. I
didn't care about the organization. I really just wanted to help. The organization came about as a result of necessity of partnerships and raising money and all of those things. And, it got from feeding them to Frederick told me, I'd like to go back to school. I'm 15. I don't know what it's like to send somebody to school. So I told him, I said, I can't promise that I can send you back to school, but I'm going to try my best. And I was sincere with that. I will talk your ear off if you give me some of your time. I will talk your ear off about why this is important, about how talented these kids are. And at the time, everyone told me that you don't know the first thing about working with children on the streets. You also don't know that you can do anything about this problem. I can't tell you the number of times after I speak to someone, they will educate me about why I was the least qualified person to work on this. But there was something they could not convince me against, and that was the fact that if I could change, anybody can change. That was the one thing they could not convince me.
The cornerstone.
Otherwise, if you met me when I was 9, 10, 11, and I even have classmates who later on volunteered with Street Priests from that time. Some of them, that's why they came to volunteer with Street Priests, because if you met me, I was a menace. I was and I kept, that thought was at the back of my mind, if I could change, anybody can change.
Wow. Okay, so we're pretty much almost out of time for this episode. The whole time I was thinking to myself, we definitely need to have part 2. Because this has been so, even for me, really refreshing. And I'm just thinking what it's going to even do for those that get to listen to this. And of course, many people have heard your story before, but for additional context for people, now Street Priest has
7 staff of 7 full-time people.
Yeah.
We have almost 1,000 volunteers.
Yeah.
We over the past 9 years, we've impacted close to 20,000, young people, and there some of these young people who now volunteer. For example, Kingsley, who you watched in the documentary.
Kingsley, you saw Kingsley through
high school. He graduated. He has his own business. He's currently now in university. As we speak, he's also one of the key coordinators of our back to school program.
And on top of all of that, you also consult with SAP on stuff that has to do with their what do you call that thing? CSR. How do you?
Yeah. So for the last 3 years, so this was again, I wish I had examples of this, but I guess everything happens the way, it is supposed to happen. But again, as a result of my work with, disenfranchised young people, and education, because that's also a cornerstone of our work. I first started consulting with SAP in 2019, more like beginning of 2020, concerning they had a new partnership with UNICEF to bring digital skills to 1.5 million young people in India, Turkey, and Vietnam. It was a 3-year partnership, and I consulted with that partnership. For the 3 years of the partnership, we ended up exceeding the target to 5 million students in India, Turkey, and Vietnam. One of the projects in Turkey specifically was setting up what we called skill labs in school. So these were kind of labs that were outfitted with all kinds of technology, robotics, etc., where students could go to and learn about, and these are public schools too, and learn about, robotics and, AI and all of these things. And so across India, Turkey, and Vietnam, was 5 million young people who were impacted by that. Now I advise the youth entrepreneurship strategy for the company, because they're trying to see how can we connect more entrepreneurs in, developing nations to the skills that they need to run entrepreneurial ventures, solve problems in their communities, etc. Because that's one of the biggest catalysts in any society. It can't be an outside intervention. It has to be from ground up. And I also want to point out that there are a lot of competencies I was picking up as a result of my work.
And that's what I was even trying to emphasize by highlighting all of these things, because you've also spoken to BBC, you've done stuff with Oxford University, you've done a documentaries in what was it, Brazil, or was it Brazil?
Brazil and the Dominican Republic.
And the Dominican Republic, like all of these things, but having been told at some point by many people repeatedly and in different forms, you're not qualified to do this. And everything achieved without actually going to get some kind of formal training to do it. I mean, of course, you've gone to school and all of that, but that was after the fact, or while like they were happening together. It wasn't like you took the time off, went and learned as they expected you to learn, and then came back to solve the problem. And I think that's just like a huge highlight of this, is the fact that visceral feeling, if you would even call it that need to solve a problem has to be stronger than all the voices that are saying you're not enough. You're not enough, especially when it's in a field where the problem is so large and there are not even enough hands to solve them.
It's very true. It's not qualified people that solve problems. It's hungry people that solve problems.
Wow.
And it's something that I've definitely learned firsthand. And one of the reasons why I said I was going to address this, about why I feel like there's that theory about even street priest being an idea that I stepped into. Last year I went to Calabar, Nigeria, where street priest is based out of. And I went out with our operations director. Now, when I was living in Calabar, Nigeria, if I was trying to get to a place quickly, I couldn't let street children see me. They will literally cause hold up. If they're on the other side of the road, they will all run into the road, cause hold up, come to the other side and gather around me. Like that was normal. I hadn't been to Calabar for 4 years, and then I went back in 2022 May, and I went out with the operations director of Street Priest, and he drove the organization's bus into a place, and there was a group of them there. As soon as they saw the boss and they saw him, all of them started running towards me, but they all ran past me and ran to him. And in that moment, I realized that truly
you're a custodian of something.
I was just looking after something.
Wow.
Because now he embodies that, but it's not just him. And that was how the name Street Priest came, because I wasn't even thinking about a name. Street Priest came from frustration. When I was speaking to people, they're like, oh, What's the government doing? What's the church doing? What are these priests? Oh, they're driving cars, pastors, they're doing this. Why don't they solve the problem? And out of it, I said, why can't you be the priest on the streets? That's how the name Street Priest came about. And so for me, it was not an organization, it was an idea that anybody, if they care enough, if they're hungry enough, if they're cursed not to be able to look away, they can do something about the problem.
Yeah, so this has been an amazing episode. I've learned so much, and I'm sure that everyone that's listened has picked up some very important things. If you guys would like to reach out to us, let us know what you've learned. You can visit our website at atypicalpodcast.show, or you can email us at hello@atypicalpodcast.show. That's .show and not .com. James, if they would like to reach out to Street Priest and support as volunteers or financially, how can they contact you?
So first of all, thank you so much for that, sir. Street Priest is across all social media platforms. Street Priest. If you look up Street Priest, that's what's going to come up. Our email is streetpriest@gmail.com. Our website is streetpriest.org. And if you feel led to support or be a part of this, first of all, everybody's welcome, and anything is welcome. Like any kind of skill, whatever it is, just reach out, and you can also donate on the website. If you want to be a consistent partner, there's an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks again, everyone, for listening. We really, really want to hear from you. Your feedback is important to us. So hello@atypicalpodcast.show is where you can reach us. Until next time, God bless you.